Welcome to Shelf Help, a channel dedicated to talking to the void about whatever book I happen to be reading. I am your host, the reader. The following review will contain spoilers. I have something of a love-hate relationship with YA fantasy. On one hand, adult fantasy can cling to Tolkien and Dungeons and Dragons models a little too tightly, and YA tends to relax this a bit. On the other, YA tends towards telling over showing, and there is that here, but not as bad as I've seen in others. I also don't hold it against a story if I know where it's going. I read a lot. A lot. So chances are good I've heard the story before. So when a story zigs when I expect it to zag, I really appreciate it. The trope flipping in this book is divine. Veronica and her sister Val are animages. Animagi? I'm going to go with animagi. They can talk to animals, but they have very different ideas of how that should work. For Veronica, animals are friends. Requests are made and rewarded with kindness. For Val, it's a master-servant relationship. She will impose her will upon them. Veronica is also not exempt from this view in the world. It is clear from page 1 that Val wants to keep Veronica under her thumb by infantilizing her. As their grandmother said, both girls are like fire. Val devours, Veronica lights the way. This is not the most subtle of books. The girls have been on their own since their grandmother was taken by an angry mob. They've grown up on the stories of Phoenix Riders, an animagi-only military group that goes back to pre-Empire days with a long history of warrior queens. The most recent was of Valkyra, who went to war with her non-magical half-sister, Veronia. The Phoenix Riders sided with Valkyra, and the non-magical council sided with Veronia. Both queens died, and Valkyra lost the war. The fallout was immense. The remaining Phoenix Riders were hunted down and their birds executed. Some riders were also put to death, others were sentenced to bondage. And it's not just the Phoenix Riders. All animagi suffered the same fate. This is the world Veronica and Val grew up in. After the death of their grandmother, they go in search of phoenix eggs, and they find 2, but only one hatches, and the phoenix bonds with Veronica. As I said, Veronica and Val have very different ideas about how to use their powers. Val greatly disapproves of Veronica's loving relationship with her phoenix, and demands she asserts her dominance, forces her will on the phoenix. When Veronica can't betray her own value, Val murders her phoenix. This is the straw that breaks Veronica's back. After failing to resurrect the phoenix, she storms out, determined to find another one. Instead, she finds the fledgling reformation of the Phoenix Riders. But they're only accepting boys. And the story doesn't go the way you expect. Full marks for averting and flipping tropes here. Yes, she goes through the whole cross-dressing stick, but the reason they're only taking boys is a matter of practicality, not sexism. The funding has all come from rich families that already had phoenix eggs, and they just happened to be boys. The one family that had a boy and a girl only had one egg, and a single female rider might be awkward. And everyone but the commander admits the reasoning is flimsy at best. Of course, Veronica becomes friends with the commander's son, who is handsome and smart and kind. Warm feelings quickly follow. When her sister returns to reveal her cross-dressing ruse by cutting her tunic and binding off to reveal her breasts, his response is refreshing. He gives her his tunic, points out that there is a literal army at the literal gate, and this could be dealt with if they live through the night. Seriously, this is the best response to me. So often in YA, this would lead to a fight and worrying about the future of the relationship, and all the time when they should really be focusing on the life and death situation happening around them. The fact that they recognize and prioritize the battle is just wonderful to me. When Veronica was told the riders would only take boys, I actually rolled my eyes, and I was sure I knew how this would play out. So impressed and surprised. And that's not to say I don't enjoy a good female empowerment story. But the cross-dressing to prove the girls are just as good as boys is played out, especially in YA. Plus, with the background full of warrior queens, it would be an incongruent message in this particular story. Which brings us to Valkyra, the last leader of the Phoenix Riders. The beginning of the story, Val paints her as a hero, who led the Riders in a final fight to the bitter end against the tyrannical, anti-magi-hating Empire, a light to guide all magic users who went down in flames for the sake of her people. As the story goes on, Veronica begins to question her sister's version of this history. Valkyra begins to look less and less like a hero, and more like a rash, impulsive child who sees it as her sole destiny to rule the Empire for no other reason than she has magic and her sister does not. Veronia, in a Valkyra's mind, simply is incapable of being a proper queen. Even if she had magic and a phoenix, she must be a puppet to the non-magical council and incapable of thinking for herself. The parallels between a Valkyra and Veronia, and Val and Veronica, are no accident. That said, I have a few questions. First, even if we assume a Valkyra was a completely incompetent leader, how did they lose this war? While dragons are more popular in fiction, Phoenix used here, but the theory is basically the same. One side having magical flying mounts, and the other not, is like bringing a jet fighter to a knife fight. Phoenixes are described as eagle-like. Bald eagles can fly at a speed between 75 and 100 miles per hour. If you want to go for more of a falcon, peregrines have been clocked at 240. Even scaling up to something the size of a horse, you're still looking at a bird that could theoretically move at 50 miles an hour. That's as fast as a dove. Which brings us to the sport of skeet shooting. Skeet shooting uses clay discs to stand in for doves. The idea is to shoot the disc in flight. But it's not as simple as point and shoot. Ideally, you want to shoot it in the upward arc before the disc loses momentum and starts to wobble and drift down. But if you want to actually hit the target, you can't shoot at it. You have to shoot where it's going to be. Because the delay of seconds between pulling the trigger and the pellets reaching the disc is enough to carry the disc out of range. And all that with the knowledge that the disc is not a real bird. The discs are predictable. Birds can change speed, direction, trajectory on a whim. Now let's talk about siege weapons, specifically catapults, because that's what the book claims the Empire had to fight the Phoenix Riders. Siege weapons are not fast. They're big and heavy. They need to be hauled around by a team of draft horses, or taken apart and assembled on site. Their purpose is wall breaking, to fling heavy rocks against large stationary objects like castles. Even if we assume a rotating catapult that could follow a phoenix, which to my knowledge is pure fantasy, loaded with small rocks like birdshot, you would still be shooting at a predictable trajectory. A live bird and a military-trained human can just go over or under. And you would just be peppering your own people with rocks, since no walls are going to keep giant birds out of a city. Second, how do the non-magical users keep magical users in bondage? They can still use their magic. In fact, the army actively has them using magic to calm pack animals, use messenger pigeons, and lure animals in for the hunt. So what is keeping these magic users from summoning a few bears to maul the camp at night? Having some night birds make a racket to prevent sleep. Have the horses throw their riders. Send all the pack animals scattering. They aren't even chained together or to soldiers. They just wear a chain with a tag as an identifier. Seriously, the Empire is basically moving on the back of these magic users, and they're not really fighting back. In the B-plot, we have several animagi traveling with soldiers as slaves. They're in the middle of the woods, trekking through the wilderness, far from the support of the Empire. And it's not like they can't ask the wild animals for help. The very first scene has Veronica being helped to see in the dark by an owl, and Sev, who is a weak animagi, is able to influence wild bats. Yes, having a warhorse charge fearlessly into flames and arrows is dramatic, but having a flock of birds peck the soldiers' eyes out is practical and more effective in the long run. I'm going to put this on my second shelf. I do like it, especially the trope subversion, and I will be getting the next one. But it doesn't have that must-have-it-now feeling that I need for a top-shelf reading. However, I can see how this would totally be someone else's absolute jam. Thank you for your time. I know everyone's mileage will vary, so feel free to leave your thoughts.